Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Culturing Podcast. My guest today is Katrina Kibben, and she's the founder and CEO of 3 Ears Media, which is something that probably many of you, she does something that maybe some people don't even know exists. And she is an HR and recruitment writer and copywriter. And I love, her take on, using words in the HR space, because oftentimes we hear copywriting used as a marketing term, as something that's, used to sell things, to market to people. But when it comes to HR, when it comes to the workforce that you have to sell your workplace. You have to sell the job opportunity. You have to sell a dream. So Katrina is an expert at this. And we actually connected on Twitter because of, somebody's post about how I believe it is Twitter that themselves are saying, permanently you can work from home now. You don't have to come back to the office. And, there's a whole host of things that I can imagine that means for Twitter, whether it's, they tear down their building, they, lease out a bunch of their space. But really what the post was about that we were both commenting on, which is funny, was about how micromanagers are sort of now off, what are they going to do? They're how can they micromanage, right? But, Katrina piped in saying, actually people micromanage all the time using technology. They don't have to be, somebody lurking over your shoulder. And so, let's start there, Katrina. I'd love to have your insights on what you've read and what you've written about in terms of sort of technology as a way to micromanage and how, dangerous that can be. What's your experience there? I'd love to hear your take.
It's funny. We went to this topic because that's part of why I started this company, right? And so you talked about copywriting as a feature of marketing, and I almost take it one step back, right? So whenever you start a company, I always believe you should start with a problem, right? Yeah. And when I started my company, my problem was hiring is hard. And people always give me the look when I say that, because thanks, Captain Obvious. Yeah. Of course, hiring is hard. But the reason hiring is hard is not very obvious. Okay. So the reason hiring is hard is because there are a million variables we do not control, up to and including all the variables that those micromanagers try to control. They think they can create every piece, every data point to create some outcome, and that's not how things work. So with my company, the what I figured out is the one thing we can control is how we ask. And job description and job postings are the primary currency of recruiting. They're how we ask. And ultimately, I think so many micromanagers fail because they don't ask well in the first place. They don't take the time to think about what daily tasks would be important to talk about. They don't think about sharing up front that they'll use monitoring technology. And that is part of the expectation and the goals. In fact, I find that micromanagers, surprisingly, are consistently the people who actually have no idea what outcome they're trying to create. They just think they have to control every little piece along the way. They forget that we work for a purpose.
Right. Well, and yeah, so in reference to people that aren't fully getting the context, there's a company called Upwork, which is sort of a place for freelancers, gig workers to, I can go on and post a job and I want to have a website designed, or I want this landing page designed, or, there's a whole host of services that people can say, hey, I can help you with that. And what Upwork as a company decided that they would, it's not mandatory from my understanding, but it is, it can be kind of turned on if you want to be guaranteed as an Upworker, freelancer, that you would get paid kind of thing. And what is being turned on is actually a technology that will take screenshots of your work, will count how many mouse clicks you're making, how fast you're working, and basically looking over your shoulder the entire time you're trying to work. And so you can imagine if this was what happened to you, and again, what I love to always talk about is that, work is never separate from life. We never can have a full separation of work and life. It's why, work-life harmony and work-life integration are much better terms than work-life integration. Work-life balance, because, you can get an email from, your wife or your husband or your kid or, your bank, and you do look at it at work, right? And it might pop up on your computer. Well, now somebody has the option to screenshot when, let's say your doctor emails you. I don't know if many doctors email, but something confidential, that's terrible. That's super scary. And when you then think about if that's a constant thing that could be happening, then that's a pressure on your shoulders as you're trying to do this work and trying to be effective and productive. Then, just imagine what that feels like. But we don't imagine. We don't, most people that do micromanage don't, number one, realize they're doing it. And number two, they don't realize the implications on why this might not actually be something that's good, because in their mind, they feel in control and they feel like that's the only way to obtain control.
Well, and they think they're optimizing for profit and understanding how long projects take.
Right.
When in reality, especially our present reality, I think we have to be extra considerate that there's no fine line.
Right.
There is no line between work and life anymore. I mean, you're sitting in my office in my house, right?
Yep.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Home is our life, is our work, is our fill in the blank over and over again. Yeah. And I think managers who are optimizing for efficiency instead of empathy right now are really going to miss out on true productivity, because you said it. And I love what you said about, like, how does that feel for the people on the other side? Because let's be real. And I'm sure you could say this about your own work and your own experiences. I know I can say it about mine. Trust fed productivity, trust fed creativity, not more tools to look over my shoulder. Never.
Yeah. And there's a difference between, setting expectations, setting, standards, setting, understanding of where we're going, and here's your boundaries of where we want you to be working in this. And we do have, this expectation that you would get this done by this date. But it's then saying, and it's keeping lines of open communication, but it's not defaulting to where you're like, my default position as a manager is to believe you're not going to work very hard, is to believe that you aren't that productive naturally, and I need to do that for you, right? And that's where it, like, again, how does that feel? But because, and this is, it's not often, we can often blame the micromanager, but we often don't look one step ahead or one level ahead, perhaps, where it's like, we don't know the pressure that micromanager is under, right? And that's probably the root issue, right? That somebody else is setting these expectations on them that's causing them to act in this way. And so I'd love to know, because you do work a lot with recruiters, with people within HR, what does this look like within HR departments? Because I'm really curious about, I spend a lot of time understanding and interviewing people from within HR, but I don't work in HR myself. So it's always interesting to see, somebody that spends a lot more time with these folks. Like, what does micromanagement look like in HR in general? And how, number two would be, how does HR sort of act as a catalyst for micromanaging, or maybe how do they act as a tool or a service or, some way to support managers? What are you seeing that's working there in the HR world?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think there's very good intent and very poor follow through as far as HR's micromanaging. And I think a really great example was the transition from the workplace to remote work.
Okay.
There were kind of two paths that the traditional HR department could take with that information, right?
Yeah.
One is they could kind of, example, SurveyMonkey. If you want to see a company doing this really, really well, that's path number one. So SurveyMonkey went out and let their people work. Every other week, they would survey them. On the alternate weeks, they would do a live webinar, just like what you're watching right now, and tell people how they were addressing it. Example, in week one, people said, my workspace is subpar.
Right.
I work at your desk, not mine. I need a desk. They gave every single employee a $250 stipend to make an office. The next week, they found out that people were struggling to get childcare. Right. So you know what they did? They opened up their learning money to make it accessible for kids too. Okay. Survey, action. That is the ideal state. That's what future viewing strong HR leaders do right now. The micromanagers said, they sent out a very formal email. And the first sentence was, we expect you to be online between 9 and 6 p.m. to maintain standard office hours. We will have weekly check-ins with your manager where we'll be monitoring your performance. And it was all about how you had to work instead of being empathetic. And I think what I find fascinating, two things, and they're both psychology elements that I think we have to think about as HR and recruiting leaders, and also the people on the other side, the employees of these companies. So I think the first piece of the psychology is that HR and recruiting leaders need to be culture leaders right now, not hiring leaders. A large part of your role is off the desk right now. It's frozen, it's eliminated, right? There are things that aren't on your desk that traditionally are. Shift to being a culture leader. You can be an employee engagement leader. Be a support system. Here's the other thing that I find absolutely fascinating. Remote employees have always been treated like the redheaded stepchildren of companies. Have you ever been the only remote employee? Or have you ever been the person who dialed into a meeting? Okay.
I haven't, but so I can empathize with that. Yeah.
I was on a marketing.
Okay, go for it.
I was a VP of marketing for a completely remote. My team sat in Boston and I sat in Nashville.
Wow.
So 8 of them in one room and me 800 miles away. I would fly in every other week because that's what my boss thought was necessary. But you know how often I was forgotten from meetings that I scheduled? You know how often people forgot to dial me in? They couldn't hear me. They couldn't interact with me. And suddenly dialing me in, me being remote, felt like an inconvenience. I think we'll see a lot more empathy for remote employees now. A lot more engagement and finding ways to trust them and value their inputs, even though they're not sitting in the same room.
Yeah. And I mean, this comes back to that fundamental challenge that I think so many people in the workplace have, is that, believing, it's still so in people's insides that they believe that if you're at work, you're working. And if you're not at work, you're not working. And this is where it's become really challenging, because I think when we, again, look at what does it take to do really good work mentally? What does it have? What are the, sort of things, parameters that you require to do really good work? Well, you need to feel trust, like you alluded to earlier. You need to feel like you are safe, so you have to kind of know that your job isn't always on the line, so to speak. But I think one big thing is also, knowing yourself and knowing just simply when you do work best. And this is something that, again, we've for centuries barely discussed, that most people are not the same type of person. There are, there are studies that say there are 3 different types of people, and that, some people have a morning lull, some people have an afternoon lull, and some people have an evening lull. Well, if I know that my lull comes in the evening, then I'm going to work probably better 9 to 5. But if I know that my lull comes in the morning, or I'm not as much of a morning person, then, having a team where you're we always have to have stand-up meetings at 7 a.m. because that's what's going to get the day started right. Knowing that actually I'm going to basically be useless from 7 till 10 a.m. Sure, I might show up to the meeting barely paying attention, but I'm going to do freaking awesome work at 10 to midnight, right? And allowing people that, especially in a knowledge economy, when very rarely do you need to be in, at the same time working always collaboratively. There's certain organizations where you need that. You do need a meeting sometimes to, really get after something. But then, 95% of the rest of your time, you're working solo and you're sending a couple emails that you can actually wait hours, if not days, to have a response back on. asynchronously, sort of is the word. So, my question would be to you, as somebody that's spending so much time investing and writing job descriptions, I'm curious, what have you seen in terms of trends, even pre-COVID, the last kind of year or two, but then even what are you maybe seeing people are asking for now? Are people writing into job descriptions that we trust you, that, this is a workplace where we want you to, take it under your own discretion when you set your hours, or are you still not really seeing that?
I'm still not really seeing that because I think we buy into the belief that work has to look like work. And I actually wrote a deep dive article about this a few weeks ago about why I do not understand the entrepreneurial approach. If we didn't like working for those big companies, if we didn't like the hierarchy and the offices and the 9 to 5 and the BS, why do we create companies that replicate those models? Right? Or one of my favorites, the open office concept. What is open office concept? What do they look like post-COVID? They look like human zoos is the answer. Because what these companies are suggesting is that you put plexiglass around your desk and just work in your little box. What? I'm not working in a zoo. Like, screw you. No. And I will throw snacks at people. Like, no. But my point is, so often I think companies believe that professional means impersonal. It means doing exactly what everyone else has done. And that's just not true. And the place where it shows most often is the job description. And that's because most people were never, ever taught how to think about it, how to brainstorm it, or how to write it. And I've been able to create a company on that because job descriptions are the currency of recruiting. You shouldn't be doing any hiring without that in your hand. But 9 times out of 10, that piece of paper sucks, right? What we wrote in the first place is terrible about setting expectations.
What I almost never understand, I think for me, I struggle to believe that recruiters are often effective. And why I say that is because I really find it challenging to believe that somebody can write a job description of a job that they barely know anything about.
Yes.
And so, I hate the word best practice, but what should people be doing in working with recruiters, working with someone like you that's a recruitment copywriter? Why is this still happening? Why are there job postings when you look at them, you're like, I don't even know what that means. Pretty sure the person who wrote it has no idea what that person will be doing. The first 3 conversations you have in the job, application process, you get I remember when I was looking for a job last year, I got a call from an HR person and it was just so clear they knew nothing about the job. And yet I didn't get the job because I was testing them. So I would ask all these hard questions and they got defensive about it. And I didn't get onto the second interview or whatever. And I was there was many reasons I'm sure that could have happened. I'm not saying I'm always hireable, but I'm saying it was just so odd for me. As much as I love company culture, as much as I value and appreciate people in HR, sometimes I think that their job shouldn't include so much of the job application process. So again, fight me on it. Tell me why I'm wrong and tell me why we haven't seen much change in that area for a very long time.
I'm not fighting you on this one. When I do presentations on this topic, I tell people the reason, and candidates, anyone who's looking for a job, ears perk up right now. You have to know this about recruiters. They don't know anything about your job. You said it. They are people who are representatives of work. They've done recruiting, not the job you do. And so many of them start writing a job description by guessing, by copying and pasting an example from someone else, because recruiters are expected to be good at a lot of things. They're expected to be great communicators. They're expected to be great emailers. They're supposed to be great at operations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we put too much on them, just like you said. There's way too much expected of them. And they have maintained their terribleness because writing is never at the top of that list. I've worked with thousands of recruiting teams, and I was the only writer on any of those teams. Ever in my entire career, I was the only writer. There were never two of me, even though writing is how we ask and how things work. And so my advice to candidates when you're looking at a job is there's 4 things that you should really be looking for in that posting, or at least you should get answered in your first conversation. 1, the perks. What's in it for you? You deserve to know that, right? This job, you're willing to change your whole life. They should probably tell you why and give you some benefits. 2, daily tasks. You should know what you're going to do every single day, and you should probably enjoy doing those things. Seems like a no-brainer, but most job postings don't actually tell you that.
So this is interesting too, even before you move on, because again, the way that I see work moving, and not just like my own brain, like I see in company culture articles and what leaders say that they want in the future of work, is that people aren't given tasks. They're given, they're trusted to know what those tasks will be. And so even onto that point, I think it's so interesting that you bring that up, because I would, agree that if you are going to have like designated tasks, you should know about them. But also it's so interesting how few people still hire looking for somebody that would be smart enough, talented enough, and the right person to come in and say, I actually don't think those are the right tasks for this job. And this is why I think it's so interesting, because again, it's almost like we look for somebody that can do a job instead of somebody that can help us build our company.
Because we don't start with the outcome in mind.
And that's it, right? So what often will happen is you see a bunch of companies like failing, and they'll fire the person they just hired and blame them, instead of realizing that from day one, that job was already obsolete and needed to be being changed and in process. And like you're saying, job description, job profile, job title probably wasn't even the right one to begin with, or it's definitely obsolete in the first year because jobs change so fast. Like there's estimations that say like the top 10 jobs in 5 years don't exist right now. 10 years, like by 2030, I think, that the top 10 jobs barely exist right now.
I would guess
how are we dealing with that?
See, and I think that'll happen faster. I don't think it'll take till 2030, because 65% of jobs today must be done in person.
Right.
Things have to change. They have to.
And it's even funny, the word must. I think probably that word must existed in a fake way. We assigned it saying it must be done this way. I just listened to the CEO of Verizon on a podcast, and they have something like 350, like it's just the amount of people they have in their workforce, number one, but also who are their customers. And he said something crazy. He's like, it's so wild how many things, like we used to have to install fiber to houses and have to go in the house. Since COVID-19, we've invented a new way where we no longer have to go into the house at all. Just things like that before, guaranteed there was multiple meetings with the board saying, here's how fiber works and here's how we do it. And that's the only way it will ever be done. All of a sudden, there's a global pandemic. You can't install fiber and your customers need it, and you figure out a way. And all of a sudden now the remote workers can be added to the list of people that were remote before. And now people that were in person driving around in trucks doing fiber installations can perhaps do it virtually. Right. So it's just wild.
And I think the reason we're hitting that innovation is because we're asking better questions in the first place. Mm-hmm. Right. And so here's an example of how that would translate into the job posting. What I like to ask my customers is I'll ask them, what projects are they doing now that would prepare them for this role? I will not put 3+ years experience using Salesforce. Mm-hmm. I actually refuse to use years of experience at all because, and you alluded to this, we know that years of experience at a company is not a universal experience, right? So just because I have used Salesforce for 3 years does not mean I know how to use Salesforce the same way as a Salesforce admin who is certified at a company who is the sole person who works on that for 3 years, right? It's about the projects and really understanding the tangible outcomes and what success looks like and working backwards from there to understand what they've already done that are going to propel them to success in this job.
That's so good. Okay, I interrupted your flow before. So you should ask daily tasks, perks, and then you were going to go on to a third one.
So it actually ties to what we were just talking about. So it's not necessarily the daily task, is actually how those roll into the next one, which is impact. Who do you impact? And of course, my brain is rolling on the fourth one.
Well, could you add to that, like, who do you impact, but also could it be what are you measured on? Like, what impact do you have to create in this role?
Yeah.
I think that's something that, is so common, that you come into a role and you might think that you're going to be measured on a certain, outcome. And actually you find out that that's not at all what you're measured on, or, and even I think people need to know because they know themselves. We don't trust people that they know themselves.
Yes.
And I want, as a candidate, to be able to know what I'm going to be measured on. And am I the type of person that if I'm measured on that, will I perform?
Yeah.
Because, there are going to be some people that they could do a sales role, but in a certain company, if the sales roles are measured by this versus this, they're going to perform well or not well. And so I think being able to know how the company thinks through performance is also so important, because people will self-select. Yes. And they're doing you a favor when they do that, and they're doing themselves a favor.
Yep. So so this is why I ask this next question. If I was the best hire you ever made, what's happening in 6 months that is not happening right now? Right? And you start to picture success, and we can talk about it tangibly instead of me just guessing. Because so as an entrepreneur, I love asking that question. And the way that I'll phrase it as an entrepreneur is, all right, in 6 months, if this was the best project ever, and you go out to all your friends and you tell them, Katrina is the best. Oh my gosh, you have to hire her. What happened? When you get that answer from a customer, when you get that answer from a hiring manager, you have just put the ball in your own court. You just gave yourself an advantage because you know what a win looks like. And if you mutually share the win, you're on the same page, which reminded me of what number 4 is, right?
Amazing.
It's the tone of the company.
Yeah.
You can understand how they define a win, how they talk about success. A great example, I worked with a sales team that doesn't do quotas. They do team quotas.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a unique job. It's traditional sales. You own your own. You kind of have to do your own thing. No, this is a team sell. No quotas. And writing about that was a completely different job than writing about inside sales rep who has a full desk.
No, that's so good. I'm curious, like the last thing I want to finish on today is, in the US, 35 million people filed for unemployment. They're going to want jobs again. Many jobs, company leaders will be like, oh, we didn't actually need that job. Let's just not ask them back. Many people, this always happens in like furloughs and layoffs, is you see blue skies and you're like, actually that employee was slacking for, 2 years and we never did anything about it. Now's the time. They're going to assess culture fit, but then also these companies are just really struggling. Many companies are struggling and they won't be able to rehire, but there are some companies that can hire. There are some companies that are ready to get going and they're actually going to want to have a fresh pick. And what I'm, very worried about, and this is where I do empathize with HR folks and recruiters, is they are going to need that help. They're going to be fielding more job applications than probably they've ever seen. So, what's the key takeaway for hiring managers, for leaders, executives, but also HR and recruiters? Like, if they can't do a session with you, take an hour and run through a job description, you do it live. But if they can't do that, or if they're just, super overwhelmed, they need to write 25 new job descriptions, job postings. What is your advice for them, and what should they be doing? How can they be thinking through this? And with the key thing that I'm trying to mention here is that they're trying to really define who the person is they want, so that a bunch of applications, so that people self-select, right? The problem I've often found is that people will say, oh, like, we're doing so well at this company because we have this many job applicants. And they'll use it almost as like a, pat on the back. We're an awesome company. We're fast growth. Everyone wants to work here. But the problem is that I often say is, I wonder if you just wrote really shitty job descriptions that were too vague and too, general, that all these people applied because they're like, I guess I can work here. And that's what we don't want in this scenario, right? If you have, you have to hire all these people back to work, you don't have the luxury of being able to, just have a general posting and then have your recruiters and your HR folks like running through all these unqualified applicants. You want people to self-select way more before. So, okay, how do I do that? If I was in those shoes?
Well, I think it's important, obviously, to note that more is not more, right? We should tell people why they shouldn't apply. And I would push back a little bit and say, if there were ever a time to take an hour to work on your job postings, it's now. And here's the bottom line. Anyone you hire will be part of the team who decides if your company thrives or dies in whatever is coming next. Truly. Every single person who fuels your company now is part of the determining factor in your outcome. So if you, and here's the other piece, you said it, 33 million people are unemployed right now. If I guess 2 ways to look at that. One, I can hold really tight and keep my fingers crossed that my company comes out on the other side, or I can look at this as an opportunity and say, there are 33 million incredibly talented people on the market. People who could accelerate my company. People who could help me ask those different questions, because that's how Verizon is thriving. That's how companies are creating new approaches, is because they decided to ask better questions, to ask different questions. That's how you write a better job posting. That's how you keep your company alive. And that's how you find better people, is by digging in and truly understanding their experience and working backwards from there.
Yeah. And this is an opportunity, I think, for a lot of leaders to, really say, okay, I'm ready to be a better leader. I'm ready to actually be somebody that trusts and builds teams around me. Like, you talk to the greatest leaders on the planet, and they'll all say that most of the people they hire are smarter than them, more talented than them, and just really balance them, versus I know everything and I need to hire people that I can control, that I can feel confident and adequate, and better than, because again, you need really talented help to get out of this. And I don't think enough people are going to realize that at first. So, if you're listening to this, definitely, take a moment and get a bit self-reflective. Hires that you've made in the past, what did that look like? Did you hire people that actually, that you knew you could control, that you knew, you could mentor, let's say? And that's great. And we always have room for junior people, and they can grow and learn from you. But you're also probably going to have to hire people that, you're not actually, like, it's crazy, but you're probably not going to be able to afford to pay crazy high salaries anymore. You might have to pay less, and you might actually need to find somebody that, in the past had their own business, and you wouldn't have normally hired them before. But now you're like, actually, like, we need the scrappiness. We need the innovative thinkers. We need the people that don't follow the rules, that aren't going to come in 9 to 5, that are going to completely disrupt the way that our company usually would have someone work for us. But they're going to be the ones with the idea on how to execute, make something happen, and could manage an entire, because they might have to take on, like, I live in Calgary, and we're kind of oil and gas city. We're like Houston's partner. And the thing about oil and gas is because it was so inflated in pricing, and again, I'm not an analyst for oil and gas, so I will definitely, butcher some of my analysis. But what I've often circulated with people is that in oil and gas, because the prices of gas and oil were so high that people could be paid so well, and multiple people could be paid so well that you could have such large workforces that actually would reduce really what a normal person's work would even require. So you had a bunch of people getting paid very well to do not a ton. Of course, that are amazing people in oil and gas that work their absolute butts off. But there, was an overall trend that, if you compared oil and gas to any other industry, their workload wasn't actually as high, yet they were making really good money. Well, now that's going to be flipped on its head. We're going to have people working their butts off and getting paid very little and not being able to have a team of 20 to do one task. You might have to have 3 people doing it.
Yes. And those companies, they are a classic example of company who just tried to barter on careers with money. Oh, I pay $1 more than so-and-so down the street, so they'll stay with us. They didn't try to build anything, and now they're going to pay for that.
Totally good. Okay, well, I think we're at our time. Thank you so much for being with us, Katrina. How can people reach out and find you if they need help with their, job profiles, job postings? How do they, get your help, and what do you want to point them to?
Yeah, so I would tell you first, I'm the only Katrina Kibben in the world, which is a very exclusive thing in the days of the internet. So if you spell my name correctly, you will find me. And what I do is I work on job posting. So if you want help with a job posting, I take it in a pretty unique way in that we knock it out in an hour. And people love that. So you come in, like I said, we got to ask better questions. So I take you through my custom intake. I write that job posting for you live, and we're done in 1 hour. So if you think it takes too much time or it's too expensive, you should probably go over to 3yearsmedia.com. You can get some details and see if that's true.
Amazing.
I have a feeling you'll be surprised.
That is so amazing. I'm typing it in right now. 3yearsmedia.com. Is that right?
You got it.
Triple E. Okay, good. So head there, folks. Amazing. I love that. So, head over there, and Katrina's, a very well-known writer and blogger, and she's got tons of amazing articles. I know you referenced another article that you just wrote. So, just check out what she's up to, but also feel free to reach out to me if you're also curious about, how to handle your culture right now. Love to hop on a quick call and just, share some insights I've learned by even hosting this podcast. I've interviewed now 45 people that are leaders and executives about their company culture and how to build a great one. So I don't know everything. I am always learning, but I'm happy to share and just shoot the shit if you need some, a person that's not in your company to just chat about culture and how to make it better. Amazing, guys. Have an awesome day. Bye.